We don't provide reform. We don't provide accountability. Instead, you see people like Mr. Veltri promoted, somewhat validating Mr. Allen's observations, and trusted, as it turns out, with critical investigations. I mean, we saw the FBI. I hope there's an investigation underway on the events in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th. Is there an active Inspector General overview of that?
I actually don't have jurisdiction over that. My understanding is the DHS Inspector General.
Inspector General Kufari does. And as SIGI, you know, the Integrity Committee, you formally directed that. You know, they've tried to target people, even as Inspector Generals. Did you feel sometimes limited or coerced because of how SIGI has changed their behavior over the years?
Yeah, let me just say, I was the chair of SIGI, not the chair of the Integrity Committee, and by law, that
is separate.
Distinction, Congress has separated those two, but the Integrity Committee is part of SIGI. Look, I've dealt with issues at the Integrity Committee. I think there are improvements that certainly need and can be made, both internally and through legislative action, that would improve the process. But I do think, and I've worked with folks there, that they have tried to exercise their responsibilities, the chair of the as members of the Integrity Committee, as best they could.
Well, one thing we absolutely have to do is we have to change the way it's funded. Right now, they're harvesting cash from other agencies, including extra money. And so Congress needs to take action, in particular with funding. My time has expired, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I'll pick up maybe a little bit where my colleague just left off, and the question was about Butler, Pennsylvania. I'm curious to know if any of you are aware as to whether or not the FBI is involved at all in determining what's going on in Springfield, Ohio, because as far as I'm concerned, there is domestic terrorism afoot, and it is at the word of the Republican nominee and his running mate. So do we know if anyone is checking into that on the federal level? I'm just curious. Just a yes or no, anybody?
I don't know.
Okay, perfect. Either way, I want to move on, and I want to talk about Mr. Kirshner. I'm just curious, if you were to define what weaponization of the federal government looks like, just in a quick, short definition, what would it be?
Using the Department of Justice to reward your friends and your criminal associates by delivering pardons after they'd been convicted by juries or before their case was even concluded or before their case was even charged, and conversely using the Department of Justice to punish your perceived enemies, order investigations and prosecutions, even if they're not warranted by evidence. I'm sorry, that was not brief.
That's okay. It was accurate. Because that's how I see weaponization as well, and it's something that we saw a lot out of Trump specifically, because all of his friends were going to prison, and he's probably got more friends that are headed to prison soon, and if we are lucky, he will find him a cellmate soon as well. But nevertheless, as we talk about weaponization, because this whole committee feels as if it's projection, I want to go to something that's pretty interesting, but I'm gonna start with Mr. Allen. I wasn't on this committee the first time you were here, so this is the first time we're interacting, but I am caught up to speed, and I have a simple question for you, yes or no. Do you believe that career employees like yourself should have your job taken away even if you've done your job well and followed agency rules? Do you think it's right to be fired just because you have political disagreements with those above you?
No, it's not right to persecute anyone for their political or religious beliefs, especially in an organization where there's supposed to be the free flow of ideas.
Okay, I appreciate your answer and your honesty, and I absolutely agree with you. It is interesting, though, because that's exactly what Trump and my Republican colleagues would do if they won the election. It's spelled out in Project 2025. Trump would strip due process rights available to career civil servants and remove, suspend, or reduce their pay in an all-out effort to oust agency employees for partisan reasons rather than because of issues with merit or performance. And before you say Trump and Project 2025 aren't affiliated, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit into the record Trump's campaign page where he claims on day one I'd reissue 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to fire rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively. The only reason democracy is standing strong today is because we had public servants who pledged loyalty to the Constitution and rule of law and not to Donald Trump. Mr. Questionnaire, your testimony today demonstrates you're familiar with Project 2025. Is that a fair statement?
Particularly as it pertains to the Department of Justice.
Okay. And you are aware, or maybe you're not, we'll see, on page 547 that Project 2025 states its goal of implementing a top-to-bottom overhaul of DOJ that, quote, must include the FBI, because anything less would, quote, guarantee the failure of the conservative administration's agenda. Are you aware?
That does not make a lot of sense to me.
Okay, but that's in Project 2025.
It is
Okay.
on, yes, it is.
All right, just wanted to clarify that. And also, this agenda includes, for example, enforcing federal criminal laws against providers and distributors of abortion medication, as well as rescinding policies that hold that sex discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, transgender identity, among other things. Is that correct?
Yes, Representative, on page 562, they talk about aggressively going after prosecuting, quote, providers and distributors of abortion pills that use the mail. So folks who are, mailing abortion pills to women who need it, that is really not what is endangering our country or inspiring, violent crime.
I absolutely agree. This week, the New York Times reported multiple instances of Trump trying to weaponize the DOJ to retaliate against his political enemies, finding that, quote, Mr. Trump told Mr. McGahn that he wanted to order Mr. Sessions, the Attorney General, to prosecute Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Comey, and if Mr. Sessions refused, he would take matters into his own hands. I know my time is running out, so I just have to ask, Mr. Chairman, given you've convened this hearing, theoretically it's you, given that you've convened this hearing on weaponizing federal agencies, will you commit to publicly condemning Trump for attempting to weaponize the government and condemn Project 2025 for its efforts to do the same?
Gentlelady's time has expired. And I yield, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Mr. Allen, I'm going to give you a little notice. You've written some notes. As far as I'm concerned, you're the person I'm most interested in hearing from. I'm from Charlotte. I've been to the Charlotte field office. I know some people there. I was extraordinarily impressed by you and the other whistleblowers when you previously appeared before the subcommittee. I'm impressed by you again. I haven't been able to be here the whole time. I'm going to yield you some time, just if you have things that you wish to say in just a moment. But the first thing I'm going to say before I do that, and then I'm going to give Mr. Jordan the rest of my time, is I'm just overwhelmingly troubled by the fact that no one seems to be able to do much about what has happened to you. You got the Inspector General, very respectable person. You've done a lot of things that have been historic, but you issue a management alert. And to me, it sounds ridiculous to say you don't think these guys at the FBI, the senior managers, understand that they shouldn't retaliate against somebody by putting them under extreme personal hardship while they engage in a completely baseless persecution over their security clearance, and they leave them in limbo for 27 months, and to this moment haven't paid what I understand to be the consideration under the settlement that's been reached. That is astonishing. And if that's not astonishing enough, that all you can do is issue an alert, Congress does absolutely nothing. In the majority party, not one thing to impose on the Department of Justice or the FBI an appropriate sanction for what they've done. And we have a hearing about it, and everybody in the minority party, they're fearing what Donald Trump would do in the next administration while they sit here and they look at the guy who's been persecuted by the FBI. And everybody in the room understands it. Mr. Allen, do you have comments you wish to make? I'll give you about a minute and a half, and then I want to turn the rest of my time to Mr. Jordan.
Yes, sir. I would just say that I consider the hearing today my last act of service as a public servant for the United States of America. And I'll give you my professional opinion. I was an intel professional for our country for many years, and I would give recommendations, and I'd also look at indications and warnings. So I would offer this to the American people as my warning to them. Since this is a warning to the American people, I say, I personally have no confidence that the FBI will rein in its own conduct. I've been persecuted along with Garrett, Steve and Kyle, and countless other whistleblowers. It is my opinion that the Bureau used reprisal and fear to control the workforce. It has been a seemingly effective tactic. I personally believe that there are no current effective checks and balances against them conducting lawless action with any type of correction in a legitimate time frame. I welcome the work of the IG, but I think any type of lawless action, there's no legitimate time frame to rein them back in. Their ability to overclassify information can allow them to stonewall forever. To the American people, you have a duty as a citizen to vote, and I strongly urge you to do so. It's how you participate in the American experience. I know people have doubts about election integrity, but you must vote. It is your claim. Stake your claim and don't forfeit it willingly. Have your voice heard. My other recommendations are in the natural order. First, vote. The second is the Second Amendment. Arm yourself and know how to defend yourself. Make 3 to 4 friends in your neighborhood and promise to come to each other's mutual aid in times of hardship. And during the Great Depression, people stocked up a pantry. So I think that's a good practice, especially in our economic times, and make sure you have 3 to 4 months of food. And as a person of faith, I'd say pray the rosary, go to the First Friday devotions. That's for everybody, all my brothers and sisters of all faiths, and I know I'm Catholic, and read the gospel of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and live it every day. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for the time.
You know, Mr. Allen, the fact that there are servants like you who have borne up under persecution that a lot of political leaders in this country do not care about is the thing that heartens the American people, and I'm confident the American people will resolve the situation no matter how weak Washington is in response. Mr. Jordan, I'm sorry I didn't reserve much time for you, but I yield to you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen, for those well-said words. Mr. Horowitz, did you ever request permission from the Deputy Attorney General to investigate attorney misconduct in Special Counsel David Weiss's office?
I have not, at this point, asked for that authority. As we've engaged on this issue in the past, it's, first of all, not clear whether we have that authority. I'd have to have that discussion. But secondly, while the prosecution was ongoing, it was my view, consistent with our policy and practice, to let that prosecution play out. And then,
Do you have concerns?
I think there have been a number of legitimate concerns raised. Yes, Congressman.
Your time has expired.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Donald Trump's Project 2025 is direct attack on women's reproductive freedom and health care. And one of its most effective assaults on our rights comes from its call to criminally punish healthcare providers who distribute FDA-approved abortion medication by mail. This would effectively end access to a safe legal procedure that 2/3 of American women who seek an abortion rely on. And how would Trump's Project 2025 do that, Mr. Chairman? By weaponizing our federal government against women and doctors. The most corrosive attack would direct the Justice Department to ban the mailing of abortion pills by enforcing an obscure 1873 obscenity law called the Comstock Act. You heard that right, a 151-year-old obscenity law. Mr. Kirshner, could reviving this 19th century statute and weaponizing DOJ to enforce it block a clinician from sending abortion pills to patients?
It could.
And yes or no, could it stop the manufacturers from even delivering mifepristone pills to clinicians and pharmacies?
It seems it could.
Trump's Project 2025 directs the Justice Department to start using its surveillance powers to monitor these pill makers and goes so far as to name them in their blueprint. Mr. Kirshner, could that kind of shadowing result in medicine companies being targeted and harassed?
Yes.
Could weaponizing the Justice Department to enforce this Civil War-era law in fact create a de facto nationwide ban on mifepristone?
It could.
This isn't about politics. This is about control. It's about denying women the ability to make decisions about our own bodies. It's about putting Donald Trump and J.D. Vance right in the exam rooms of doctors and millions of women. It's about punishing and even jailing doctors who provide compassionate care or loved ones who help you obtain the health care that you seek. Mr. Kirshner, I want to ask you about another way Trump's Project 2025 would weaponize our government against millions of women and doctors. The medicine we're talking about, mifepristone, has been deemed safe and effective by the FDA for over 25 years. Women in nearly 100 countries have safely used it for decades. Yet, Mr. Kirshner, Trump's Project 2025 would require the FDA to, quote, revisit and withdraw its initial approval of mifepristone, falsely claiming without evidence these drugs are dangerous and should be illegal. Would that Project 2025 agenda be based on sound medicine, science, and facts, or would it be a blatant weaponization of the FDA?
The latter, and it sounds like it's based on politics, not on science, not on medicine, and not on what is best for women and the decisions they have to make with their doctors.
Thank you. The FDA recently allowed certified brick-and-mortar pharmacies to dispense mifepristone and doctors to prescribe mifepristone via telehealth, which expands abortion pill access, avoids added costs or stigma. But Trump's Project 2025 calls for the FDA to reverse that guidance, despite the Supreme Court recently rejecting that argument. It goes even further by eroding the privacy protections of abortion patients by promoting prosecution for women who take the pills. Could this weaponization of our government agencies obliterate the privacy of those who obtain or dispense abortion pills?
It could, and it's dangerous.
Project 2025's assault on our basic freedoms doesn't just stop at women's health. It undermines the safety of whole regions of our nation. Before my time expires, I'll quickly note that Trump's dangerous Project 2025 proposes to eliminate the National Weather Service in its entirety. I'll remind everyone that we have Hurricane Helene, who is quickly approaching the shores of my state. This is the very agency responsible for helping us prepare for and respond to climate change-driven natural disasters. Right now, Hurricane Helene bears down on Florida, and it's the National Weather Service that provides critical forecasts that help warn and keep our communities safe. Let's be absolutely clear. Project 2025 is not about reform, it's about control. Whether it's women's bodies or the agencies that protect us from disaster, Trump's Project 2025 would erode the freedoms that we all take for granted. We cannot allow Trump's dangerous agenda to strip away our rights and leave millions more vulnerable than ever. Whether it's criminalizing healthcare providers or dismantling the National Weather Service as more hurricanes threaten our coasts, Project 2025 is an existential threat to our nation's core values and safety. We will not let this agenda undo everything we've fought for, because we will not go back. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair asks unanimous consent to enter into the record a coalition's letter on reforms that are needed. The letter is addressed to Chairman Comer, Chairman Turner, and myself, Ranking Member Nadler, Raskin, and Himes. Without objection, that will be entered. Chair now will recognize. Yeah, you recognize the ranking member for as much time as she'd like. I'll give you 6, 7 minutes, 8 minutes if you'd like, and then or a closing statement after that, and then I have a couple more questions, and then we'll be adjourned. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. I don't know what to do with all that time. Kind of freaked me out when you said that. I started,
You could always yield it back to me.
Oh, no, I don't think I'm not giving up what's given to me, I'll tell you that much. You never know when you can get that, but I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here, each one of you. Thank you for expressing your ideas and your thoughts. And I did want to ask some follow-up questions, though, to some of those. Mr. Inspector General Horowitz, my colleagues across the aisle have said that the Inspector General found that the FBI intentionally weaponizing the security clearance process to purge conservatives from its ranks. Mr. Inspector General, did your office find that the FBI has a pattern or practice of misusing the security clearance adjudication process to purge certain FBI employees?
We have not made such a finding.
Okay. And also, there were allegations made that the FBI has weaponized this, any findings that it was related specifically to individuals who might have expressed sentiments with regard to January 6th. Did you find that?
We haven't made such a finding. We've actually, Congresswoman, had complaints come in from both sides on these issues. On one side, complaints about field offices not taking action in January 6 cases, and on the other side, complaints about offices that did take matters again in January 6th.
So as usual, it's across the board of the
We
political
have
spectrum.
complaints from whistleblowers on both sides on that issue.
And that is par for the course you have found in the FBI and in your position over, hearing from your other Inspector General officers, that complaints may come from both sides of the political spectrum.
I've certainly seen, with regard to the DOJ law enforcement components, issues coming from various perspectives, I will say, non-ideological, ideological complaints across.
What about religious? Have you made any findings that the FBI security clearance process targets Christians
We've not made such a finding.
or targeting military veterans?
We've not made such a finding.
Thank you. You know, I understand my colleagues' concern that it would appear that Democrats are not taking the issue of whistleblowers seriously. And I think we do. We have a committee for that, the Oversight Committee, for which when I was a member of the Oversight, that's when I first met Mr. Horowitz, was in having oversight over different agencies and questioning you about some of your findings there, some of which, when I first came to Congress, were targeted against a Democratic administration, at the time, the Obama administration. We've gone through a Trump administration, we're now in a Biden administration, and so the vagaries of political persuasion, you've seen them all. But I think the reason that the Democratic members have been bringing up Project 2025 and President Trump is because it presents a global threat, a true weaponization of offices and of a position against the American people as a whole. We see places like North Korea, Hungary, Iran, now Venezuela, where those citizens could not have imagined 20, 30 years before, potentially, that they are living under a dictatorial rule. I went to school with individuals, I'm dating myself, in the early 80s, with students who had fled Iran. I have been around young people in undergrad who have fled North Korea. And the notion that anything like that could happen in this country seems so antithetical to our thinking. But we cannot drop the ball in when we see an individual or a group of individuals who have power trying to take that control. And it is our opinion, many of our opinion, that Trump, for his own purposes, has now joined forces with individuals who have offered Project 2025 as a means to an end for each one of their own desires. I would ask to submit to the record a CNN article, Trump claims not to know who is behind Project 2025. CNN review found at least 140 people who work for him are involved.
Objection.
Thank you. And in this article, and in other places, we will see the nexus of relationships between the president and individuals who have written this. 6 of his former cabinet secretaries, 4 individuals nominated by the former president as ambassadors, his first deputy chief of staff, my former colleague Mark Meadows, and also his longtime advisor, Stephen Miller, who are advising Project 2025. Federal Communications Commissioner under President Trump, Brendan Carr, Lisa Laurenti, who was a delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, all wrote components of Project 2025. We have the American Accountability Foundation putting together a roster of current federal workers it suspects could impede Trump's plan for a second term. I would direct your attention to what we have up there on the screen, which shows so many associates who have, in fact, contributed to the transitional plan for a presidential Trump next term, that are part of his orbit. Paul Dance, top official in Trump's White House. We have Ben Carson, former HUD secretary. Christopher Miller, acting Secretary of Defense. Peter Navarro wrote a section defending the former president's trade policies. This has been drafted as the next conservative president's last opportunity. The last opportunity for what? Not the America we know now, a different form of America. One that meets the demands of specific individuals, not all of us. One women that does not include us having complete autonomy of ourselves. One that puts a form of Christianity that may not be my form of Christianity. That's why we have a separation of church and state, so that we can all worship our God as we wish. That's not what Project 2025 is looking towards. Today you may be part of it, tomorrow you may not be. Today it may help you, tomorrow it may not. I know I'm on the front line. I know my community's on the front line, but tomorrow it may be yours. Next week, next month, 180 days he's given himself. 2 years from now, it may be your son, your daughter, pointing in the military, pointing a weapon at their fellow citizen, at their brother or their sister who are protesting on the streets of America. Because yes, in Project 2025, it allows the president to direct the active military to come to the streets of the United States against those that he deem as political rivals. That's in Project 2025. Those are the things that are in there against us as Americans. And that's the reason why, Mr. Chairman, we keep talking about it. Not because whistleblowers' issues are not unimportant, but because this is a clear and present threat right now to the American people that we need to join forces with and stop. So I want to thank you for the additional time. And while we're on the recess, God bless you and your family.
You
And
too.
I pray safety for all of us as members, all people who have spoken out, and individuals we may not agree with one another. But I pray that this election goes safely and that we are all back here again to continue the people's business.
I agree. Just a few more questions, if I could. Mr. Horowitz, you said you've not seen a pattern, but you have found evidence, or let me do it as a question. Have you found any evidence of a focus on religion and vaccination status playing a role in discussions about clearance decisions?
We certainly did, as to Mr. Allen.
Of course. I mean, that's the whole point. I thought, you know, his email questioning the leadership at the FBI, they used that. They used his vaccination status. They used his religion. I thought pretty soon they were going to accuse Marcus Allen of writing Project 2025. I thought that might happen. You didn't write Project 2025, did you, Mr. Allen? No, you had nothing to do with that. Mr. Levitt, you didn't either. Right, and I know Mr. Horowitz didn't have anything to do with that. Let's go to this questionnaire. Because this questionnaire that was used by the FBI in these clearance discussions, I find very troubling. In the opening, in the sort of the preamble before they get to the questions, they say they're asking colleagues to rat on fellow colleagues. They say, you are being asked to provide information as a fact witness. Should you refuse to answer or fail to reply, action against your security clearance may be undertaken. So I find this amazing. Like, they're going to a colleague in a security clearance investigation, they're asking a colleague to talk about that individual, and if they don't, they're going to lose their security clearance. I mean, that, and then when you look at the question, do you find that a little troubling, Mr. Horowitz?
I certainly find I'm not sure I find necessarily the questioning of individuals about allegations troubling. How you tell them about it and talk to them about it is concerning, as you indicated, and certainly the questions were highly inappropriate.
Certainly coupled together. Hey, we're doing a security investigation on Mr. Allen, as an example, and if you don't answer it, your security clearance is in jeopardy. And oh, by the way, here's the question. Did Mr. Allen ever voice support for President Trump? Did Mr. Allen ever express concerns about the COVID-19 vaccination? Did Mr. Allen ever attend a gun rally?
Gun rally.
That is as troubling as it gets, and right at the top of this questionnaire, FBI Security Division, Security Integrity and Investigation Section, Clearance Investigation Unit. Mr. Levitt, have you ever seen anything like this?
Not before this last round of whistleblowers, but I do think the point I tried to make earlier is even if this questionnaire was only typed up by a couple of individuals, and to be clear, those are the same ones that were worried about the Kelly cart. So they're the same ones that were worried that they're
Right.
supervisors. But even where, in cases where this questionnaire wasn't used, we've heard from a number of whistleblowers that these types of things were asked about, and of course we know they factored into the decisions. And so I think it's not just about the questionnaire, right? I hope that the Inspector General's office will look at how all of these issues were focused on by leadership.
That's the element of fear Mr. Allen just talked about in his last response to Mr. Bishop. The fear, that environment of fear. And this is it in practice, right here. That is what is scary. So if that's not weaponization of government, earlier Ms. Crockett asked about, would the weaponization of government include certain things? It would certainly include this in the environment described by Mr. Allen, and it would certainly include the 27 months that he had to live through and the 24 months now Garrett O'Boyle has had to live through. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. Oh, Mr. Kirshner, would the weaponization of government include lying to the FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign? You got asked a series of questions. Would it include? I'm just curious if you thought that would be the weaponization of government.
You know, lying to a court, any court, FISA court or otherwise, is deeply troubling.
That wasn't the question. Would the weaponization of government include lying to a FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign?
I would suppose it could.
Could?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Would it include text messages written by people who were involved in that effort to spy on presidential campaign? Text messages like, "Don't worry, we'll stop Trump." Would that be the weaponization of government as well?
You know, I think that's inappropriate language because we're supposed to be doing our work, you know, apolitically, without fear or favor. So, you know, I think that's ill-advised.
Sure was. It's so ill-advised. Mr. Mueller kicked those individuals off his team. So ill-advised that Kevin Kleinsmith got prosecuted for lying to the FISA court in order to go spy on a presidential campaign. That seems to me to be the weaponization of government as well. I'm going to thank all of you for being here. Mr. Allen, we really thank you. You're the one who's had to endure this, your testimony to the strength of your faith and your family, I think, is just inspiring. We appreciate your service to our country, service to this committee and to the country for telling your story and being willing to come forward and work with Mr. Levitt. Mr. Horowitz, we appreciate the work you've done over the years in getting this information to us. And with that, the committee stands adjourned. Okay, Caroline.
Seen the nature of the observation.
I seen that.
We can't call any part of the territory of India as Pakistan because that fundamentally is contrary to the territorial integrity of the nation. seen the nature of the observation.
I seen that.
We can't call any part of the territory of India as Pakistan, because that fundamentally is contrary to the territorial integrity of the nation, one.
I would like to offer any comment on that, but
Anyway, not social media can't be controlled.
And social media can't be controlled, and
The anonymity
so.
attached with the social media makes it a very dangerous tool.
But should I tell you, the answer to sunlight is more sunlight.
that's true.
Not to suppress what happens in the courts, because I think this is a very important reminder to everyone. And the answer is not to close doors and shut everything down, but to say that, look, please, our reach extends beyond these four walls.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.
सीधी तस्वीरें आप देख पा रहे हैं सुप्रीम कोर्ट के सभागार से, जहां हीरक जयंती समारोह का उद्घाटन करेंगे प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी।
To all of you, on behalf of the Chief Justice of India and judges of the Supreme Court, I extend a very warm welcome to all the distinguished invitees to this inaugural function. Your gracious presence here adds immense value to this hallowed occasion when we have gathered to celebrate a historic day, a day when the Supreme Court of India came into existence in the newly born sovereign democratic Republic of India. As we enter into the 75th year of the Honorable Supreme Court of India, we are honored to have amidst us Shri Narendra Modi ji, Honorable Prime Minister of India, Dr. Justice Dhananjay Yashwant Chandrachud, the Chief Justice of India, Justice Sanjeev Khanna, Judge, Supreme Court of India, Shri Bhushan R. Gavai, Judge, Supreme Court of India, Shri Arjun Ram Meghwal ji, Minister of State for Law and Justice, Independent Charge, Shri R. Venkat Ramani, Learned Attorney General for India, Shri Manan Kumar Mishra, Chairman, Bar Council of India, and Dr. Adish C. Agarwala, President, Supreme Court Bar Association. We are also immensely honored to have amidst us Justice Bibi Rehana Mumli Gulbul, Chief Justice of Mauritius, Justice Obaidul Hassan, Chief Justice of Bangladesh, Justice Jayant C. Jaisurya, Chief Justice of Sri Lanka, Justice Bishwambar Prasad Shresht, Chief Justice of Nepal, and Justice Kinley Dorji, Judge, Supreme Court of Bhutan. On this landmark day, as we take a step back in time to celebrate the rich legacy and journey of the Supreme Court of India, an institution that has played a pivotal role in shaping the destiny of our nation, I humbly request Justice Sanjeev Khanna, Judge, Supreme Court of India, to kindly deliver the welcome address.
An activity which occurs outside of work to punish its employees. Were the officials involved in this unlawful conduct, such as Acting Assistant Section Chief Dina Perkins and Assistant Deputy Assistant Director Jeffrey Veltri, punished or in any way held accountable for their violation of employees' First Amendment rights?
Not that I'm aware of. I know Ms. Perkins is still in the same position, and Mr. Veltri received a promotion to the 5th largest FBI office in the country, the Miami Field Office. According to whistleblowers, that promotion was delayed because he was under investigation for whistleblower retaliation, but that wasn't for the targeting of individuals for their First Amendment views.
Okay, so in this administration, and again, while ranting about Project 2025, in this administration, you can actually violate employees' First Amendment rights and get promoted? Is that what your testimony is?
I don't know why the FBI didn't look at this closer, because, again, it's clear that there was a widespread understanding that these were issues being looked at, that these were the considerations. And I know Mr. Horowitz has talked about them not exclusively only targeting conservatives, but all of the individuals that have come to us from these various whistleblowers. There's one counterexample of somebody who wasn't conservative. All the others that we've seen, there was a clear focus on these individuals' vaccination status, their First Amendment views, their political stances, and that seems to have gone, been accepted by leadership of the FBI.
Boy, the FBI has really been weaponized against not only the American public, but its own employees, hasn't it?
It's sad. The term weaponization obviously can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but when you see the direct impact on someone's life, like Marcus and his family, to go 27 months without pay, as of today, he still has not received the 27 months of back pay that the FBI committed to give him. Similarly for Garrett O'Boyle, the amount of time they've gone, I think 23 months at this point, it truly has ruined their lives.
Well, what does this actually say about the Department of Justice and FBI and their interest in actually righting the wrongdoing and the unlawful acts that they've engaged in?
It's hard to make those kinds of sweeping conclusions, but I definitely would say that the way that you help keep people, you help them abide by good things by having good laws in place. And I firmly believe there need to be stronger laws to help prevent this kind of thing in the future. There have to be changes to protect FBI whistleblowers, no matter what administration or what political party is in power.
Well, and I would agree with that. And Mr. Allen, I'm sorry for what the federal government did to you. I think it's an absolute crime against humanity the way that you were treated. I respect your faith, respect your loyalty to this country, and we all recognize that what the FBI did was wrong. We thank you for being here, and with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
I would just ask, Mr. Chairman, if we could stick to some decorum and not disparage witnesses or characterize their testimony. They're here as guests of the committee, and we should treat all of them with respect.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kirshner, the Project 2025 document, which was drafted by 6 of the former cabinet secretaries and about 140 individuals who worked in the Trump administration, with regard to the FBI, says that the FBI has been captured by an unaccountable bureaucratic managerial class and radical left ideologues. How long were you at the FBI? Your mic.
I was with the Department of Justice, specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, just up the street here, for 24 years. I wasn't with the FBI.
Okay. Are you aware that of the close connection between the United States military and the FBI?
The United States military and the FBI?
Yeah. Well, we got to, there's a...
I'm sorry, the close connection meaning?
There's a veterans preference for military veterans.
In hiring?
In hiring, going to the FBI.
Sure, I'm generally familiar with
Why don't I ask Mr. Horowitz? Mr. Horowitz, anything in your experience indicate that the FBI has been taken over by as they say, a radical left ideology?
We haven't found that, Congressman.
Mr. Kirshner.
Yes.
Going back to Project 2025, the Project 2025 indicates that to ensure the promotion of the president's agenda, the FBI should ensure the assignment of sufficient political appointees throughout the department and throughout DOJ.
Representative, you must have read my mind, because that's the very page of Project 2025 I just opened to. It's specifically page 569.
Let's talk about that then.
Please.
Okay, so right now, and Mr. Horowitz, right now, we don't allow political appointees within the FBI, is that correct?
That's correct, other than the director who's
Right, at the top.
confirmed by the Senate.
That's correct. I'll come back to you on that. So this Project 2025 indicates that they're going to ensure the assignment of sufficient political appointees throughout the department, and not simply replicating what was done under previous administrations and reflected in the Plum Book. This is right from Project 2025. The number of appointees serving throughout the department in prior administrations, particularly during the Trump administration, has not been sufficient either to stop bad things from happening through proper management or to promote the president's agenda. Let's talk about that. What would the impact be if we all of a sudden just allowed the president to start putting political hacks, people who were his henchmen, into the FBI to pursue his agenda?
If you populate the upper echelon of these agencies with political appointees who have to pledge loyalty to the president, and the very language you cited, ensure the assignment of sufficient political appointees throughout the department to do what? To stop bad things from happening. That's a quote. Who decides what bad things are? And to promote the president's agenda. Right. There's nothing there about, and to, make sure you're making decisions based on facts and law without fear or favor. This sounds to me to be the exact opposite of what we want our civil servants and our appointees to be doing.
Thank you. Back to Inspector General Horowitz. Thank you for your good work. Can you talk about what the implications would be if the next administration were to allow or to inject political appointees throughout the FBI organization and throughout the Department of Justice?
Well, I'll speak generally to why Congress has in the past had only the FBI director be the only political appointee, and that person has to go through Senate confirmation process. Obviously, we want our law enforcement, whether it's federal, state, or local, to be people who may have, I've testified about this before, wide-ranging views. There is no problem with our law enforcement having deeply held political views. In fact, I think for most of us, we would want our law enforcement officers to be engaged with their communities and understand their communities and be participants in it. But we certainly wouldn't want them to effectuate the use of our laws to advance a political cause or an ideology. And frankly, through our work during my tenure as IG, my predecessor's tenure as IG, as we all know, there have been times when the FBI has strayed, both ways. You could talk about Dr. King and the illegal wiretapping that occurred with him. We saw it in work we've done, obviously, more recently. We have done investigations involving the FBI's looking into, back in 2004, both the Democratic and the Republican convention issues around those. So we've seen this over the years. It's very important to have hearings and have congressional oversight and effective internal reviews like we do to ensure that law enforcement operates in an unbiased way, not based on ideology.
And the injection of political appointees, would that help the cause of a more judicious FBI and Department of Justice?
Well, it certainly would create risks of that, Congressman, and I'm assuming that's why Congress over the years has not authorized the department or federal law enforcement to have more political appointees in their realm. And that's true, by the way, at the department and the other law enforcement agencies as well. I know we're talking about the FBI, but that's true at DEA and others as well.
Thanks for your courtesy, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Allen, September 29, 2021, you sent an email questioning Director Wray's testimony in front of Congress. You said in that email, there is good possibility the DC elements of our organization are not being forthright about the events of January 6th. You remember that email?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't send that to anyone. You sent that to the people you're supposed to send it to, members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, the very next day I find to be interesting, on September 30th, 2021, the next day, just so happened your 5-year reauthorization for your security clearance came due, and they said, no problem. Mr. Allen should keep his security clearance. After all, he's had it for 20 years, right?
Yep.
That happened the next day.
Correct, sir.
Decorated Marine veteran, employee of the year at the Charlotte Field office, had a security clearance for 20 years. They reauthorized your security clearance. Something else happened that next day. Your email got forwarded to the security division and to Mr. Veltri. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then 19 days later, Mr. Veltri opened an investigation into your security clearance status. I get all those facts right, Mr. Levitt? Is that what happened with Marcus in those 2 days? And then 19 days later?
Yes, except for from what we can tell, Veltri directed that day that it be opened. It's just that the underlings under him didn't carry that out until 19 days later.
Yeah. And he directed, they look into a guy, decorated Marine veteran, held a security clearance for 20. They look into him because Mr. Allen said there's a chance the FBI leadership hasn't been square with us, right?
That's correct.
And he cited a New York Times article. They thought the same thing. And oh, by the way, there's the history that we all know about. FBI spied on the president's campaign, lied to the FISA court, investigated parents at school board meetings, said if you're a pro-life Catholic, you're an extremist. So we got all that history, and he gets investigated for that because he simply questioned the leadership, went through the appropriate channels. Mr. Horowitz, did Mr. Veltri and the people at the security division follow the standard process?
They did not.
They did not. In fact, isn't it true that, Mr. Levitt, isn't it true that some of the people, I think you cited 4 of them in your statement, 4 people, the initial investigator, the second investigator, the first adjudicator, and another adjudicator, all got reassigned, they all agreed that Mr. Allen should keep his security clearance, this investigation shouldn't have happened, and they get reassigned or something happens to them.
4 of them all did not recommend that his clearance be, that there be a negative action on it. 2 of them were reassigned.
2 were reassigned. Some of them are whistleblowers now, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Man, if that's not political, I don't know what is. Oh, and they didn't stop there. They piled on. They also said, if Mr. Allen, he questioned whether he should get the vaccine or not. They came after him for that. Is that right, Mr. Levitt?
Yes.
And then they went after his faith. Direct attack on the First Amendment. Because he's a Christian, because he's a Catholic, because he takes his faith seriously, oh my goodness. We got to take his security clearance away from him, even though he served our country, decorated Marine, and held a security clearance for 20 years. That sure looks political to me, Inspector General Horowitz. Does it look political to you?
Well, Congressman, as I said earlier, we've seen issues with the FBI and how it's treated whistleblowers, frankly, across the spectrum. And I agree with you, it's very concerning that would be done here.
We know they're political because while all this is going on, they used the questionnaire. Isn't that right, Mr. Levitt? Isn't that right? They used this questionnaire to people they wanted to snitch on folks like Marcus Allen. They gave him a questionnaire.
Those were used in the case of a handful of employees, and I know that Mr. Horowitz's office is looking at that. I think it's important to note that the questionnaire wasn't the only thing, right? That these questions were asked across
I'm talking about that, the way they piled on to go after Mr. Allen and keep his security clearance and keep his pay from him for 27 months. And they did the same thing to Garrett O'Boyle. And what that has meant, as you indicated in your testimony, what that has meant to his family and Mr. O'Boyle's family. And this questionnaire said, did anyone ever vocalize support for President Trump? All right, you're allowed to say things about the President of the United States when you work in the FBI, aren't you, Mr. Horowitz?
I'm sorry?
You're allowed to say you support a president. You're allowed to say that in the FBI.
Absolutely, those questions are highly inappropriate.
And you're allowed to decide what kind of health decisions you're going to make with your own body, right?
Correct.
Those shouldn't be grounds for saying you're somehow disloyal to the country, but that's what they did. Highly inappropriate questions being asked of witnesses during security clearance investigations. That's your testimony, right, Mr. Horowitz?
That's correct.
And he got reinstated just recently. Marcus Allen you got reinstated, right, Marcus?
Yes, sir.
Why haven't they given you your money?
I am not aware why it's taking them 4 months to cut a check for all the back pay. I have no idea why it's taking that long.
They put you through pure hell for 27 months, falsely accused you. They go through the process. 4 people get reassigned because they agree with you, but the politics of Mr. Veltri, who, oh, by the way, as Mr. Levitt pointed out, is now running the second assassination investigation on President Trump in Miami. I find that just astonishing. And they won't pay you.
Right, we're still waiting for the payout.
When was the final agreement? When was the final settlement with the FBI? What was the date, Mr. Levitt?
June 1st.
Well, they've had time. Doesn't take that long to write a check, for goodness sake. So he's still in waiting. That's how our FBI treats a good man who has served our country for 20 plus years. It's ridiculous. And yet the Democrats say there's no weaponization. You got to be kidding me. My time has expired. I now recognize the gentlelady from California.
So you want to talk about weaponization of the Department of Justice? Let's talk about it. Because sadly for Republicans, weaponization tends to be in the eye of the beholder. They delight in talking about false allegations of politicized attacks on Republicans, but I want to talk about the real weaponization, the one that would come from a second Trump-led Department of Justice. We are already watching in horror as women across the country lose their autonomy, their dignity, and even their lives because of draconian abortion bans in dozens of states, which Trump delights in. He brags about choosing the Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. And if we get into a second Trump presidency, the weaponization we are witnessing will be orchestrated by the DOJ at Trump's demand. Trump's Project 2025 mandate for leadership calls for some of the most restrictive abortion and healthcare bans imaginable. In short, it lays out the path to eradicate reproductive health care and women's privacy. It calls for the CDC and HHS to closely monitor and report on individual women's health and abortions, keeping track of when women travel across state lines to seek reproductive health care and at what stage of their pregnancy they're in when they do. And alarmingly, it calls for the DOJ to criminally punish abortion providers who distribute abortion medication through the mail. Mr. Kirshner, one of the proposals I mentioned is for the CDC to track women's movements to access abortions across state lines. The mandate also calls for the president to be able to direct the investigations and litigation by the FBI and the DOJ. So hypothetically, even though that CDC-related part of the proposal didn't mention DOJ prosecutions, there are risks that a far-right government outlined in Trump's Project 2025, collecting that data, could weaponize it against the women seeking health care in a criminal context. Is that correct? So in other words, it would be possible to take CDC data about women who have sought abortions and direct the DOJ and the FBI to target those individuals. Is that correct?
It is, yes. Tracking women who are pregnant, it's horribly reminiscent of, tracking and hunting animals. It really
It's like
endangers.
stalking.
It endangers people.
It's like stalking, let's be honest, tracking the movements of women. The mandate also calls for the enforcement of restrictions on DOJ grants to comply with conservative ideology, such as prohibiting sanctuary cities from receiving federal funding. Would it be possible then that DOJ grants could be conditioned on jurisdictions limiting abortion or other healthcare access?
Under Project 2025, it seems like the sky is the limit.
Thank you. These extreme restrictions are far from the only alarming agenda points in Trump's Project 2025. The document also calls for dismantling the Department of Education, which former President Trump claimed he would do during a rally in Pennsylvania just this week. It calls for allowing businesses to discriminate against protected classes. It calls for reversal of the LGBTQ plus equity focus of the Biden administration. And if any of these proposals were to be challenged in court, Trump's corrupt Justice Department, led by loyalists, would defend these awful provisions. Mr. Kirshner, if any of these offensive proposals are challenged, they will be defended by the Department of Justice. What could be the result if the DOJ is more loyal to President Trump than to the Constitution?
They could decline to take up challenges, or they could decide to take up challenges not based on the rule of law, not based on, what is right for the American people, but based on the whims and preferences of a president.
And Mr. Horowitz, my final question is for you. Would we want agents at the FBI or any other government agency who would be seeking to promote any cause that might conflict with the Constitution? whether that be religious or ideological or loyalty to an individual rather than the Constitution?
We would not. We swear our employees in with an oath to abide by the Constitution, the laws of this country.
So does it seem like a great idea to scrap our complete civil service and pack every federal agency with people that are loyal more to an individual than to the Constitution, or more to religious ideology, or more to some other kind of ideology?
I think over the years, Congress has found where the appropriate balance is between having non-career officials and political appointees leading agencies on policy issues, and having a career civil service.
Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
President Trump has never read Project 2025, much less adopted it. Unlike the viewpoint adopted by the sitting vice president, which is that we should have taxpayer-funded sex change operations for illegal aliens in prison. And I try to be a little open-minded when I hear a provocative argument, and I just sort of wonder, when would I be in favor of taxpayer-funded sex change operations for the illegal aliens? And maybe if it was mandatory. Maybe if it wasn't optional, but mandatory, it would be a pretty substantial deterrent at the border. But to the matter at hand, Mr. Allen, it's good to see you again. You came last year and you told us about these terrible things the Department of Justice was doing to you. And you've testified today, you still don't think the Department of Justice has treated whistleblowers like yourself and others fairly. Is that your testimony?
That's correct. The treatment is unfair.
Do you agree with that assessment, Mr. Horowitz?
As I said in my testimony, Congressman, I think putting someone like Mr. Allen on unpaid leave for 2+ years is unfair while you're trying to adjudicate.
Yeah, no, I get
that. There needs to be a process here that
well,
happens promptly.
the process was to punish these people and to make an example of them. That's obvious to everyone. They saw improper actions at the FBI and DOJ. They blew the whistle on it, and then the process was the punishment, and it was the point. I think that's how Mr. Allen feels. Is it?
Correct. The process in this instance definitely felt like the punishment.
Yeah, so they've done it to you. They've done it to others. Mr. Horowitz says it shouldn't have been done. And so now I want to be a little reflective about this with Congress. Mr. Allen, you've seen, since you have given us this testimony, us continue to pass continuing resolutions that put no consequence on the DOJ or the FBI for what they've done to you and your colleagues. Do you think Congress has appropriately protected whistleblowers?
I do not, Congressman, and I think the policy recommendations can be put forward that there can be bipartisan support for to protect whistleblowers going forward in the future.
Absolutely. I mean this in no way as a partisan critique. Matter of fact, it's a bipartisan critique that we all own.
Yeah.
Because we see the evidence that you get mistreated. We hear from the experts like Mr. Horowitz that this is totally off book. It's obvious to anyone with a brain they're doing it to hurt you and to make an example out of you. And what do? We just sign the check. And we just send it over. You know what we should put in any continuing resolution? That until you get paid and until the rest of the whistleblowers get their back pay, maybe the FBI director doesn't get his paycheck. Maybe the Attorney General shouldn't get his paycheck. Maybe the FBI director shouldn't get the use of the private jet that he likes to fly around the country on so much. They enjoy all of the accoutrements of their position, and you end up screwed. And we're okay with it, apparently. Any member who votes for these continuing resolutions is voting to perpetuate the punishment that has been instituted on the whistleblowers. And while we want to talk about the weaponization of the Justice Department, rightfully so, we write the check for it, and we underwrite the debt for it. And it is sickening to me. Mr. Horowitz, I got a few questions for you since we got you here. Now, the CIGI is the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, right?
That's right.
And you're the past chair?
I was the chair from 2015 through 2020.
Does it have any binding legal authority?
In terms of, it was created by Congress as an agency.
Yeah, but does it have legal authority to issue subpoenas that it can compel?
It has not been given subpoena authority.
Okay, so what I wonder is where this group CIGI, I'll just call it the Integrity Committee, what happens when they start interfering in the work of IGs to expose corruption? Who adjudicates that?
So Congress actually created the Integrity Committee again back in 2008, gave it its authorities. The Integrity Committee puts forth a set of policies and procedures. It's required to provide them to Congress. That's the mechanism.
Yeah, but in a state of conflict, right, where you got an IG working to expose corruption, and then you've got the SIGI hassling the IG, who resolves that?
Well,
because I mean, nobody in the SIGI is not, the head of it's not like confirmed by the Senate, but IGs are confirmed by the Senate.
Yeah, and it probably in part depends on, there are two types of IGs. There's presidentially nominated Senate-confirmed IGs, there's then agency IGs. For presidentially nominated Senate-confirmed IGs, ultimately it's up to the president to decide what he wants, because the report goes to the president.
And the presidential power, not to get into a constitutional, a regression here, but the presidential power is vested in the IG, not in this administrative committee, right?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Connolly, but would you indulge me to just clarify something?
Certainly.
Inspector Horowitz, you are Senate confirmed and you were the head of SIGI, is that correct?
Correct.
I just wanted to make it clear.
Yeah, I was Senate confirmed for DOJ IG.
Right.
I think the point was that the chair of SIGI doesn't have to be Senate confirmed. I happen to be Senate confirmed sitting in that position.
Thank you. I just want to make that clear. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. Kirshner, and by the way, I apologize, at least on behalf of this side of the committee, for a disparagement characterizing your testimony. I don't think we should ever do that in a committee. We don't have to agree.
Thank you, Representative Connolly. I'm from New Jersey, so I've suffered worse.
I'm from Boston originally. We don't like that. Mr. Kirshner, Mr. Levitt's client, Garrett O'Brien, posted the names and personally identifying information, including parts of home addresses, for 4 current or former FBI officials. In August, Kyle Seraphim, who has hosted multiple podcasts with Mr. O'Boyle, tweeted, and I quote, "The people who left Garrett O'Boyle's family and my family homeless should experience what guys like us are prepared to do to evil," unquote. Mr. Kirshner, you served in the FBI. What's wrong with identifying FBI officials' partial addresses, hometowns, personal information, and making a threat? You may justify it because you think they're engaged in evil, but that's a direct threat from the way I read it. What could go wrong with that kind of thing? And isn't that the kind of threat of violence that I think, ought to be examined by a weaponization committee as opposed to what we're doing here today? Your view.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I wasn't with the FBI, though. I was with the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, right up the street there. But I'll tell you, I worked closely with the FBI, the Washington Field Office, directly across the street from my former office. And, we moved heaven and earth to prevent personal information from getting out about our witnesses, about people we were investigating, so as they, to prevent them from being unfairly, perhaps, smeared with an investigation that didn't result in an indictment. And, I had my fair share of witnesses killed in Washington, D.C., because their information got out, they were labeled as snitches, and then I had to sit with the families of a witness and talk about, how very sorry I was for what happened to them because that information.
So while we're bemoaning the alleged mistreatment of certain individuals, including some here today, which may not be true, we're escalating it with actual threats that could lead to violence, even death. Is that correct?
You endanger the lives of folks when you put that kind of information out into the public square.
Certain irony when we're worried about weaponization, while meanwhile some of the people we purport to be advocating for are engaged in this kind of activity threatening FBI agents. Mr. Horowitz, there have been allegations made that the FBI has weaponized security clearance revocations to target and root out conservatives at the Bureau. Have you found any such evidence of a broad pattern of trying to target conservatives and revoking their security clearances?
We have not made such a finding.
Have you made any findings